Welcome to our committee meeting. Today, our task is to look at the Kansas Wildlife and Parks budget, but we're going to finish up with the State Fair. When we adjourned yesterday, there was a couple of questions. I think those got answered, but we want to make sure it was about the bond and interest, and it was it 2.3 or whatever, but I didn't write it down, but Senator Fagg had a question about that, and he said it was he had got the answer. Mr. Schultz said he would be here today. Oh, okay, great. That's even better, yeah. Mr. Schultz, can you hear us? Brian? Okay. Still no, can you hear it? Mr. Schultz? Well, we're not making contact for some reason, so I could go ahead and ask, is there any questions left that need to be asked for Mr. Schultz? Senator Francisco.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I just wanted to say I was lucky enough yesterday to be in state building construction when we talked about the capital improvement budget for the state fair. And Virginia answered the question that I had yesterday about the amount that was being saved by paying off the bonds early, and I believe that was $134,000.
Thank you very much, Senator Francisco. That is good information, so I'm glad you collected that. Committee, I don't know of anything else that questions, so does anybody else have any final thoughts? Otherwise, we need a recommendation to accept the governor's recommendation with our blessing. So, Senator Peck.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So the $134,000 that Senator Francisco just mentioned, that would be, if I heard right, the savings if we paid off their bond that was issued last year, rather than, that would be the savings over a period of time. And I guess I would be asking that of research unless Senator Francisco wishes to answer that.
Senator Francisco, that sound right?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I believe that was the savings from paying off the first bond. And I will have research weigh in.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Yeah, so the $134,000 was how much was saved by paying off the bonds for the master plan. So the ones that they paid off this summer saved $134,000.
Senator Reichman.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Is that $1.3 million bond? I forgot which one that was. Thank you.
No, sir. The $1.3 million is how much the Expo Center will cost. That's the one we have. The State Fair has not started paying yet. It will be $1.3 million with interest for the Expo Center.
Senator Francisco. Oh, I thought you was pointing to.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I know that there was some discussion about also being able to pay off the additional bond, and I believe Senator Peck looked into that. If he doesn't want to suggest that we at least ask the Ways and Means Committee to look at that, I will, but I think Senator Peck had a comment.
Senator Peck.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Senator Francisco. Yes, that was something I had looked at and something I am interested in, and I appreciate the clarification. I didn't realize we were talking about two different bonds being paid off, but the master plan, is that in the governor's budget, paying off the master plan?
Mr. Chairman, that is already paid off. So they paid that off this summer. So it doesn't need to be in the governor's budget because it was in the previous year.
Okay, so I would, and you may or may not be ready. If you're not, I'll stand down until you are, but I would want us to recommend to the full Ways and Means Committee that we appropriate funds to pay off the Expo Center bond, and the full, I was told, amount that would be paid over a period of time was 1.3. So if we pay it off early, we're going to save some interest since it was just issued. The first payment, I understand, is due in May. And if I've got my numbers right, and please correct me if I am wrong from the research department, but the payments will be like $187,000 each year. And from the state general fund, we are appropriating $135,000 each year just in funding. And now, help me out, are there other appropriations from the state general fund other than the 135 to the state fair?
Victoria, you getting that?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So for the state fair is currently planned to start making payments on the Expo Center in fiscal year 2022. That's when the first payment will be made. It hasn't been made yet, but it will be made. In fiscal year 2022, the fair has received extra money, like we talked about last year, extra state general fund money to make up for lost revenue from not holding the fair. So 2022 is kind of an unusual year. They have more state general fund than usual, about $1.5 million. In 23, they returned to normal, and they only plan to receive $135,000 in state general fund to help with utility costs. So I'll say in a normal year, the state fair only receives $135,000 state general fund.
Senator Peck.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So my recommendation would be that we urge the Senate Ways and Means Committee to pay off the Expo Center bond minus the 187 payment that the state fair would have made. So the wording will have to be from research, but I don't know what that appropriation would be. Do you know what the bond payoff is as of this fiscal year?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So yes, the pure principal payment, since we haven't started interest yet, would be $1,230,000 exactly, if you wanted to pay off the bond right now. If it's okay, I would like to add, I just received some information by email, and I don't know if Brian will want to, or Mr. Schultz will want to comment on this. The Division of Budget just sent me information that the bond for the Expo Center is not really what we call callable. It's not able to be paid off early. I just received the information, but from the Kansas Development Finance Authority is saying that the bond is not really callable. I'll keep looking into it, but it's just something you might want to keep in mind. I just received the information. I'm sorry.
Not good.
Well, Mr. Chairman, I appreciate that information. That was not my understanding previously, and no fault of anyone other than just we were unaware. But if it's not callable, if we can't pay it off early, which that disturbs me that the state is issuing bonds that we cannot pay off early. I'm not going to, well, I don't borrow money, but if I were to borrow money, I'm going to make certain that I can pay that off early if I come into some extra money. But, so I guess my point is, there's no use going down this road if we can't pay it off early. I was thinking we could pay it off early, save money, no longer appropriate the $135,000 for utilities. They would have the $187,000 they were going to make for the bond payment. So the state fair would come out to the good because it's fee funds. The state general fund would come out to the good each year and in the long run. But I guess that's all for naught if it's not callable. So I guess I'll just be quiet if we can't do what I'd like to do. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Unfortunately, the way it sounds, that would be why the advantage to send it to the Ways and Means Committee to study that and make sure that's done. But I think if it's now that we know it's not callable, it kind of makes it a mute. But I think it was a good suggestion. Senator McGinn, you had a question?
No question. My concern would be, of course, cash flow. Farmers have a lot of money right now, and we'd love to just pay off our land, and then next thing you know, grain prices go down, and then we're borrowing money from the bank. So I just think we should look at their cash flow position long-term before we start doing that.
Okay, well, we can certainly do that. So at this point, committee recommendation has been withdrawn because it's impossible to do. So is someone want to make a recommendation to accept the report and to the Ways and Means Committee, but the governor's recommendation?
I move we accept the governor's recommendation.
Is there a second? Moving second, we accept the governor's recommendation for years 22 and 23. Any discussion? Seeing none, all in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed, no. Motion carried. Committee, that's all I had on the schedule to clear up from yesterday for the state fair, and we are ready to close that out, and we'll start with wildlife and parks. But first I need to ask, are there any bill introductions by chance today? Are there any bill introductions? Seeing none, we'll call on Victoria to give us information on wildlife and parks. Welcome to the committee.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Again, my name is Victoria Potts with the Kansas Legislative Research Department. I will be presenting from the white document in front of you that has Department of Wildlife and Parks at the top. So as we know from yesterday, the first couple of pages of this document are summary information. So I'm actually going to move straight to page 5. On page 5 of that document, you'll see the fiscal year 2022 analysis. And I'm looking under the box at agency estimate. The agency estimates revised fiscal year 2022 expenditures of $94.9 million, all from special revenue funds. This is an increase of $3.7 million above the fiscal year 2022 approved amount. That $3.7 million increase is driven by a couple of factors. The agency has several supplemental requests totaling $3.8 million, and we'll get into the detail of that in a couple of pages. But for now, just know that the governor did concur with the agency's fiscal year 2022 revised estimate. And I'll move to page 7. On page 7, you'll see the fiscal year 2023 analysis. The agency requests fiscal year 2023 expenditures of $97.8 million, all from special revenue funds. This is an increase of $2.8 million above the fiscal year 2022 revised estimate. That $2.8 million increase is due to a couple of things. So looking at item number 2 on page 7, the agency is estimating increased capital improvement expenditures of about $2.7 million. But of that $2.7 million, $1.7 is federal funds. And projects for capital improvements include campground improvements, deck and dam repairs, and storage buildings. The agency is also estimating federal funds, or increased federal funds for public land maintenance. And the governor did concur with the agency's fiscal year 2023 request. And I'll move to pages 8 and 9, which are just going to have those supplemental requests that I talked about. So on page 8 first, looking at that first request for the Law Enforcement Division, the agency is requesting just about $793,000 for the Law Enforcement Division to purchase record management software and body cameras. So of that $793,000, $535,000 is for record management software for the Law Enforcement Division. The agency notes that records will be centralized and the new system offers more efficient dispatch system and electronic ticketing. Another $258,000 will be used to replace 61 body cameras and purchase 110 additional body cameras for the Law Enforcement Division. And the governor did concur with that first request for the Law Enforcement Division. Looking at that second request, land maintenance equipment, the agency is requesting $320,000 in fiscal year 2022 and $200,000 in fiscal year 2023 to purchase land maintenance equipment, including excavators and a mulcher. And the governor has concurred with this request also. Turning the page to page 9. On page 9 at the top of the page, the agency has a request for park flooding repairs. The agency is requesting $2.7 million in fiscal year 2022 and $450,000 in fiscal year 2023 for state park repairs due to spring 2019 flooding. The agency shared that they continue to work with FEMA to receive federal funds for those repairs, but have not yet received any federal funds to help with that, so they're requesting to use state funds until they can submit those projects for reimbursement from FEMA. So they plan to have them reimbursed, but for now, they're asking to use state funds. And the governor did concur with that request also. Request number 4, under Public Affairs. The agency is requesting $24,000 in '22 and then $24,000 in fiscal year 2023. $15,000 is budgeted to allow the agency to produce Spanish language versions of some of its publications. And the governor did concur with that request. Request number 6, the agency is requesting $470,000 to purchase 5 boats and 1 barge in fiscal year 2023. And details of what those boats would be used for can be found on that page. And the governor also concurred with that request. And the last supplemental request, the agency is requesting just about $224,000, all from the State Water Plan Fund, to combat aquatic nuisance species. The funds would be used to purchase scientific equipment to monitor and scan for these species. And the governor did concur with that request. And finally, Mr. Chairman, I'll turn to their capital improvements request on page 28. On page 28 of that document, at the bottom of the page, the agency estimates revised capital improvements expenditures of $14.3 million, all from special revenue funds. This is an increase of $2.7 million above the approved amount. And that's primarily due to that supplemental request for state park repairs that we just talked about, some funding that they plan to have reimbursed from FEMA but are currently requesting state funds for. And the governor did concur with that capital improvements request for fiscal year 2022. Turning the page to page 29, the agency requests 2023 capital improvements expenditures of $17 million. This is an increase of $2.7 million, and that's primarily due to increased expenditures for park and fish and wildlife maintenance. Again, of that increase, $1.7 million comes from federal funds, so total increase 2.7, 1.7 is coming from federal funds. And the governor did concur with that fiscal year 2023 capital improvements request. The rest of that page and the back of the last page is a little bit more detail in each of the projects that's listed in the table in case you were interested in a specific project. And Mr. Chairman, I will stand for questions on Wildlife and Parks' budget.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So I certainly support the funding for the aquatic nuisance species from the state water plan, but then does that not show up as state general funds, or?
I'm not sure I understand your question. I'm sorry.
I'm trying to look to see, in most cases on the charts, there's no state general fund monies.
Right.
And I'm assuming state water plan would be state general fund. Is that a wrong assumption?
No, that's, so that is incorrect, sorry. So state general fund is what generally people think of as taxpayer money, so income tax, sales tax. The state water plan fund is funded through several different fees on water, including clean water drinking and things like that. So it's just 2 different funding sources.
So I do know that there's funding for the state water plan, like from the, on your water bill, you know, that they collect, and irrigation. But I also thought we were talking about a transfer from EDIF, and, but this just would be different money that's being used for this. This would be the fee fund money that's being used for the Department of Wildlife and Parks.
Sure, so you are correct that the state water plan fund does receive and is recommended to receive this year a $6 million transfer from the state general fund into the state water plan fund. So I suppose indirectly, you could say that it comes from the state general fund, but there's no way of knowing that whether this 224,000 comes directly from fee funds. It's just the state water plan fund is a large pot of money. I hope that makes sense.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And then a second question. So when we're talking about the FEMA money that hopefully will come to the state for the repairs, then there's accounting being done, so some or all of that money would be returned to the state general fund from what has been allocated in past years and this coming year for those flooding repairs?
Well, they're not requesting state general fund. They're asking to use their fee funds. So yes, the money would be used to when they receive FEMA money from federal funds, it would be used to replenish the fee funds that were being used currently.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I think state general funds were used. It's not being requested this year, but it has been used in the past.
Correct, Mr. Chairman. In fiscal year 2020, the governor did recommend $2 million state general fund for state park repairs for the same situation, but earlier. There was a little bit left over in fiscal year 2021, about $951,000, but there is no state general fund requested for 22 or 23 for anything for the agency, but specifically for state park repairs.
So my question was really, if FEMA funds came, would some of those be used to pay past state general fund expenditures? Maybe, and I can ask the agency.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just a couple quick, easy ones, I believe. Way back in 4, it talks about body cameras. Can you explain why they need what's the rationale behind that?
Sure. So for the record, we're looking at page 8 of the document for the request for body cameras. So the agency has used body cameras for its law enforcement division since 2016, and they want to replace some of those. But they also have law enforcement officers in their parks and public lands divisions, and they would like to equip those law enforcement officers with body cameras also. And they just think that, well, the agency notes it would help with transparency in their reporting to have the body cameras on all of their law enforcement officers.
Thank you. May I follow? This is going on back to the FEMA question. When I saw these, so if I understand what you're saying first, we need to spend the money first, and then FEMA come back, excuse me, say if you spend it correctly, or it goes through a process of a grant process, or what? How does that work?
So I'll let the secretary correct me if I'm wrong, but ideally FEMA would have, given the money earlier, but it just takes a long time. The last time the agency received money from FEMA, it took about 5 years. So it's not that we need to prove that we would spend the money correctly. It's just that the money isn't coming fast enough to make those repairs in a timely manner. And that's why they're requesting to use state funds. So it's not so much proving themselves. It's just that the timing is just taking a little bit too long.
Thank you, and thank you, Mr. Chair.
Any other questions? Senator Peck.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Looking at page 10 and 11, administration, I noticed the administration from actual 21 to agency 22 is a significant increase, 1.5 million in round numbers. And then when you look at the chart on page, or the graph on page 11, it has been steadily going up. Can you help me understand why the administration costs have and are increasing so significantly?
Off the top of my head, I'm not sure. Is it okay if I get that back to you this afternoon?
Now, yes, whenever you can get an answer, or possibly the agency could, but
Sure.
particularly the increase from fiscal year 21 to fiscal year 22, when I didn't see anything in here, and it may be noted, but I didn't find it. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Senator Straw.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. On page 9, under request number 4, Public Affairs, it says that the agency is requesting $24,000, $15,000 for Spanish language versions of the Kansas hunting and fur harvesting regulations. Is that to just print a certain number of them? Do we even know if we have Spanish-only reading hunters and fur harvesters?
Sure, I believe it is, yes, to print Spanish language versions of those. I don't know if I could comment on whether there's Spanish-speaking only stakeholders.
I would suggest rather than, and for somebody who minored in Spanish in college, that there are all sorts of apps and things nowadays that I just don't feel that it's necessary to print a bunch of Spanish language print materials without knowing that there's an actual need for it. And then secondly, under that same section, there's an additional $9,000 for staff subscriptions to key newspapers. With the transfer of tourism to the Department of Commerce, I also don't feel that that's necessary for the Department of Wildlife and Parks.
Any other questions for the revisor? Seeing none, thank you, Mr. Victoria. Next, we'll call on Mr. Secretary, Mr. Lovelace. Maybe he can answer some of these questions we've been talking about. Welcome to the committee.
Thank you, Mr. Chair and members of the committee. It's good to see you all. I hope I can answer some of those questions if you still have them for me, but I'll go over my general remarks. Victoria did a great job of going over a lot of our information. As Victoria pointed out, we're a fee-funded agency that we provide outdoor recreation opportunities and natural resources management. These efforts are implemented through a whole bunch of programs, which most of you are familiar with: state parks, hiking and biking trails, state fish hatcheries, public wildlife areas, assistance to private landowners and communities, education, nature centers. In addition, we provide outreach and education opportunities through a variety of established programs that incorporate both our staff and then volunteers, literally thousands of volunteers across the state to implement these programs. These include hunter education, which has, we were dealing with this the other week, over 1,200 volunteers that are active in the hunter education program. So we rely on those great people to do that along with our staff. And then also fishing education volunteers, boating, safety. Becoming an Outdoors Woman is a great program where we educate women who are interested in a variety of things in the outdoors, but just don't have any opportunity to try those on their own or anyone to mentor them. So this is basically a mentoring program, which is very popular. And then, of course, our nature centers, our state parks. We've listed a number of performance measures and can add more if you have an interest in a particular area. We mentioned the number of licenses sold, both hunting and fishing, park permits, Cfap Funding, which is a great program. Cfap stands for Community Fishing Access Program, where we can take our money, leverage federal money, and go into a community and help them manage a community lake. These are very popular across the state. So it's a terrific program, and it's actually expanding as cities realize the value to both their residents and then potentially visitors to come and fish there locally in town. We've got the education centers are mentioned. And then the last thing on that list are our walk-in hunting access program. We also have a walk-in fishing access program, but the walk-in hunting access is pretty remarkable. It was the first one in the nation. Other states are trying to copy it, but it's been very popular, where we pay landowners to enroll their land, make them accessible to the public, and we post those so people who want to use those know. We put out an atlas. That's one of the information pieces that we listed that we put out so people know where they can go and hunt. And I can tell you from my work across the country, I have dozens of people approach me at meetings, just me by myself, to say, I'll be coming out to Kansas again this year. I've got my hunting atlas, And if people feel equipped that they can come out here and have places to go, and then they're using our restaurants and our hotels, of course. And so very popular program that's really paid dividends for the state. In terms of supplemental requests, Victoria did a fantastic job of going through those. And at high level, smart RMS, is those body cameras, critical for our law enforcement. And it helps us both ways in terms of helping our officers be at the top of their game when they encounter the public. But then also, no surprise to any of you, we have a number of claims against us every year saying our officer did this or didn't do that. And the body cameras are our number one tool to help get to the bottom of that, get the facts out. Body cams, they don't lie. The other thing about our upgrade to this, currently when an officer comes back at night, they have to pull out the card and basically download that at night. And that manual step can be flawed, and they can make a mistake and not get everything downloaded and lose those data. The other thing is that involves the officer doing that. So there's a potential, we haven't run into this, but there's a potential that the officer could try to interfere with the footage on that camera. The new cameras will be automatically downloaded. At the end of the day, they automatically go. The officer doesn't have to do anything. It goes to a central database, so it's much more secure. And then we collect that. We aren't relying on getting information that the officer has stored at their home, which is typically their office, and then gathering that when we have to follow up on it later. So it's a much better system, much more reliable. And our current record management system is going away. It's antiquated, and it's no longer going to be available. So this is really critical to us. So smart RMS is going to be very valuable in a number of ways for us and our agency, and we're kind of piggybacking on the Highway Patrol's direction with this. So we're going to get it cheaper because we're partnering with the Highway Patrol as they're going to smart RMS also. The other thing I might mention, the park repairs and improvements have been described. As Victoria said, a lot of that's due to flooding. You'll notice all the parks listed there had extensive flooding. We haven't got those FEMA funds. Typically, they come quickly. There's been an extraordinary delay in this case, and we just haven't been able to afford to do some of the repairs. The money that was given to us a couple of years ago that you guys brought up was very valuable to us, and we put it to good use, but it's gone. And we're repairing things as we can, but we just have some limitations. So we're really looking forward to getting that FEMA money to help us continue those. And then also these supplemental requests. We have the budget. We tend to be very careful with our money and don't overspend. So we have this in our budget. We just need authority to spend it. Then the public affairs point, since Senator Straw brought that up, I can reference this. We've done outreach to a number of our communities and found that there's a barrier to Hispanics, and there's big communities you guys are aware of in the state, and out in Southwest. Emporia is another big Hispanic community here in the eastern part of the state. And as we do public meetings with those folks, we find that they are very afraid of breaking the law. And so when they don't have a complete understanding of the regulations, they tend to not go because they are afraid they don't understand it properly, and they may break the law. And so as we've discussed with them, this has been a barrier. We have a Spanish translation person, not one of our staff, but on call basically, so that when a person who isn't, has trouble understanding English, needs help with the translation so they can get the appropriate licenses and be legal, we can give them some help. These regulations are targeted especially on those communities so that people have that information available, so that there's no question they can go between the English and the Spanish translation, but they can be confident that they have a clear understanding of what the requirement is. And so that's based on our outreach and our survey efforts in those communities. So we feel like the need is well documented. It's been well received. The response has been really significant in those communities. And we've gotten lots of thank you notes, frankly, from folks who said, for the first time, I think I understand some of the regulations, as much as we try to make them simple, they can get complex. And so we feel like that's a program that's worked really well. And along with that, our outreach effort to those communities. Oftentimes we find individuals, when they were down in Texas or Mexico, were active in fishing and hunting, but when they came up here, they didn't feel comfortable. And so the outreach efforts are a way for them to reacquaint with our resources here and our laws and help them feel comfortable to go out. So it results in selling more licenses as a result and involving more people, especially kids. We have a program down in Emporia that I helped with last summer, a 3-part program that had over 50 Hispanic families that came out to learn about fishing and aquatic safety and just a variety of things like that. So we've done a lot of work in that area. Feel like it's really the right thing to do, and it's paid off in terms of increased interest in our resources. So I could talk all day long, as you guys are aware, but I'm glad to try to answer questions or fill in any gaps.
Okay, thank you very much. And we'll go to questions then from the committee. So, committee, any questions for the Secretary? Senator Fagg.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Director Lewis. The $1.7 million coming from federal funds, is that earmarked? Is that all maintenance money from the way I'm reading this here, or is that tied to shooting ranges or anything?
Well, that particular money, the capital outlay could go to shooting ranges. Under capital improvements, if that's what you're referring to, then there's a whole host of things that state parks, building repairs, some upgrades in some cases. Our demand, as you all are aware, has been up the last couple of years. And so some things that we could get by with in the past, restroom facilities or, for instance, campgrounds that were on 30 amp breakers. Now that's too small for today's campers. So we're having to upgrade those campgrounds, the electrical service on those. And so it's a whole host of things like that. I'd be glad to give you details because essentially every public area, every state park has improvements that we're needing to make. And so there's a whole host of those things.
Follow-up question.
Go ahead.
Thank you. When I look at this, park maintenance in 2022 is $1.2 million, and it's $2.2 million, so we're up $1 million. But this is talking about $1.7 million and talking about maintenance. My humble opinion is that I sure want to take care of what we already have because I think there's some parks and stuff that need some repairs to put our best foot forward from people coming from out of state before we expand.
Yep.
So I think we got some more room we could work in that area. Just something to think about. The other thing, and you might have hit this, but the fish and wildlife maintenance from 2022 was $880,000, went up to $5 million. So there's over $4 million between 22 and 23. What's that in regards to?
So a big part of that is an improvement to our hatchery facilities. If you've participated in our commission meetings, a lot of people focus on walleye. It's a big species in Kansas, and you can't really find walleye significantly in Oklahoma. And as you go north, they're easier and easier to grow and manage. Kansas is kind of right in the middle. They're a high demand species. A lot of people in state and out of state want to fish for them, but we only have a few reservoirs that have really reliable reproduction. So our hatchery program to produce those fish and then distribute them to our reservoirs is really important. We have an intensive facility that we're in the process of building out at Meade. We've made first steps. We need to complete that will provide the majority of walleye for all over the state. We have a handful of facilities scattered around. Meade has an opportunity because of a really good water supply there. And the right footprint to do this intensive walleye management. And that'll really be the cornerstone of our walleye program in the state. So a lot of that money is going for that facility where in a very small area using really precision aquaculture, things that weren't even around 10 years ago, we can grow a huge number of walleye in a very small area, then then grow them out and distribute them across the state. So it's, we think it's going to be a very popular program. The other thing that we do, if we end up having a surplus of walleye, they're incredibly valuable, and we have neighbors that are always wanting to trade or buy those from us. And so that helps run the program to move those fish out of state if we ever have a surplus. Right now, we don't envision that because the demand in Kansas is very high for those fish.
One more question, Mr. Chairman. Land and water development, it was 700,000 up to $1.5 million. What's the plans for that, doubling that number?
Let me make sure I know where you're looking at.
Page 28. Looking at capital improvements, I'm going down through that.
Okay. Okay. Okay, so Victoria pointed out, I didn't have the same sheet you had, so it talks about increasing and improving outdoor development acquisition for recreational facilities. So the things mentioned there, splash pad, if you've been out to Milford, we have a free splash pad area, basically a little water feature that's very popular. Milford is one of our most heavily used parks, and we opened this last year, and it's a really popular attraction for families who are coming, and an additional reason to come to the park. Cabin construction, of course, there's been increased demand for that. The last few years, we've been really maxed out from spring through fall in all our campsites and our cabin sites across the state. And so people are asking, can we build more cabins and campsites? And so, Senator, you mentioned earlier the idea of kind of taking care of what you have, and that's a very good concept. We don't want to let things run down while we're building new shiny stuff, so we've got to do both. I absolutely agree with you on that. And but one of the things that is, we have opportunities to build new campgrounds, but first we need to fix the ones that were so damaged through flooding. We still have ones. We can go right up the road to Perry, and I can show you a campground that was underwater for that year. So the road is not good, the asphalt's degraded and not safe to travel on. The campsites have to be refurbished, and we just haven't had the money to do that yet. So we will repair those first before we go to any additional ones. See what demand is requiring at that point, but we believe demand is going to continue to grow. That's a trend we see for these very popular facilities, and so we expect that once we get kind of caught up, that it's very likely that we'll see a need to increase some campsites at these very popular areas.
Any other questions? Senator Peck.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I have two questions. One, I've already asked. Can you answer the question that I asked of our research department regarding the significant increase in the administration cost budget?
I was hoping you'd forget that question because.
Well, I mean, if we're going to increase your salary by $1.5 million.
Right. It's a puzzle to me, frankly, because I'm only getting half that 1.5 in my salary. No, I wish I knew the answer to that. I'm glad to get back to you on it. We've actually been reducing under. Administration covers a lot of things. I know in terms of senior management in the department, we've decreased that in the last 3 years since I've been around. And so I'm going to have to look into that and get back to you, and I'm glad to do that, to answer that question for you, because I don't know the answer to that.
Okay, I would appreciate that. And then, Mr. Chairman, I have one more question. That's under the capital improvements, under land acquisition. I realize fiscal year 22, the legislature passed legislation to allow you to buy or acquire more land, but it went from 62,000 in 21 to 1.5 million in 22, and then it's going to level off this budget year that we're looking at 400,000. Those are significant difference in numbers.
Right. It's really one acquisition, that one that we worked so hard on the last few years and got accomplished with this committee help and Senator Fagg's leadership last year. That facility out at Kingman was almost 600 acres, and so that's the great majority of that money.
I just don't necessarily agree with the need for continued acquisition of land by the government. Yeah. And I guess that's where I have discomfort, because we're looking at appropriating 400 or allowing you to spend up to 400,000 for land acquisition in the coming fiscal year. And that seems like a significant amount of money.
It's a good point, and I know there are legislators that don't think we should be buying more land. What we're faced with is, while hunting licenses from non-residents continue to be in high demand, our resident licenses are declining, and as we survey, we do a lot of surveys because that's the data that we make our management decisions on, we get constant feedback saying, I don't have any place to go. That's the place that I used to be able to go is now leased out, sometimes to non-residents or outfitters, but access to land is being reduced. And so while we can't solve all that, and we certainly wouldn't challenge anyone's right to lease their land to make more money off of it, we recognize increasing demand on these public lands. And so we think that that's part of our formula going forward. When we have, and this happens every year, I can mention a half dozen places around the state right now where we've had neighbors come to us and say, I'm going to sell out. I don't have kids that want to come back and farm this land. I'd like to sell it to you. Would Wildlife and Parks be willing to buy it? And so that starts us on the process of working with the legislature to get permission for that. We have the money, we have the demand to do that from the public. We need to come to all agreement, if we're going to move forward on those. And as we found out with the Kingman property over the last several years, we worked on that for 5 years. It's difficult to work that and get legislative agreement on that, but we'll continue to be very transparent about what offers we get and the demand that we see, and try to work to come to some sort of agreement on what's a good middle ground.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you.
Some of that money come from ammunition sales and firearms?
It does, in fact. That federal money, two big pots of money. One comes from hunting, and so that's everything associated with that: ammunition, guns, targets, all that stuff. There's an 11-point excise tax that's been in place for 80 years, more than that, the federal government sits aside, and that's put into a pool. Same way with fishing tackle, a separate pool. Then the federal government says, based on the size of your state and the number of licenses you sell, you're eligible for up to this amount. Then we have to use the money that we generate from licenses and fees to leverage that federal money. But it's sitting there in a pot waiting for us. And so that's, when you see our budget, that's what you see, us trying to leverage that federal money. So roughly 30% of all the money we spend is that federal money that what our users pay leverage from those federal sources.
All right, thank you. Senator Francisco.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So my understanding is Kansas still has probably the least amount of public land available to citizens of many states. And I just want to say how important it has been to so many of my constituents during these last 2 years, because people want to continue to do something, and doing something outdoors has just felt so much more safe for them. And people who wanted to do things with their kids, because they weren't having the same experiences in school or with sporting teams. So anyway, thank you. I'm so glad the hunting areas and the parks that we have were there and available.
Yeah, thank you. I appreciate you saying that. We are 48th in the country in terms of the percentage of land we have available to the public. So we're close to the bottom. We did see a huge response. We were very appreciative. A number of states, some of our neighbors shut down all their public facilities, and Governor Kelly did the opposite. She said, if ever there was a time where we need to stay wide open, this is it. And we did. It took a lot of extra work to keep things clean and keep staffing up because the demand was enormous. But we loved it. It's why we come to work, is to try to provide those. And so it's been a really fun couple of years, a challenging time, but really rewarding to see so many people come out. I mean, I heard this comment over and over. I've never helped people set up so many tents that they bought and didn't know how to set up, to tie hooks on and bait hooks that they had purchased but didn't know how to use. So we've had a great time in meeting that extra demand.
Senator Ware.
And I really appreciate being on the Travel and Tourism Council, how many efforts you have built in here, excuse me, to bring in more people and to include more people in, whether they be Kansans or outside of the state. One of the programs that I've really loved was Outdoor Women. Is that what you got?
Yeah.
My family, in fact, has benefited from that, and it's been a great program. I love that we're including folks who speak various languages. It's to be inclusive when you're talking about recreation seems like the right way to go. Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you. And if I may, Chairman Kirshen, Senator Straub made a comment about the media, and I would be glad to connect you with our media person who has expanded the use of those media resources today. If you're in media, it's all about you try things, and we've got constant outreach and education efforts going on, but you have to gauge the response, right? And based on that response, you decide I want to do more of this or less of it. And so that's what those media services do. They give us feedback, basically data that we operate on. So it's not more newspapers that we can read, because we don't read all those, but it gives us access to those data that allow us to make decisions on how to more effectively target our efforts. So that's really what's behind. But I'm glad to give you more information on that if you'd like.
Any other questions? Seeing none, thank you.
Thank you very much.
Appreciate your remarks.
Thank you.
Committee, we're just about out of time. We are scheduled to deliberate until Thursday on wildlife and parks. So that's what we're scheduled for. We are also going to have a hearing that day on a bill to make good use of our time. Is that okay with the committee, or does somebody want to make a recommendation today, provided we get the information for Senator Peck on the administration question? Or you want to wait till Thursday to date it then? Senator Francisco.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm guessing that some of the increase in administration may be because of the additional efforts that were happening over these past 2 years on walking and hunting. But I think it would make sense to get that information before we make a recommendation.
All right. Senator Straub.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Not really a question, but more of a comment. I agree with Senator Peck and the concern with more land acquisition and also the increase in the administrative costs of Department of Wildlife and Parks with that change from tourism going over to commerce. I wonder if there's actually a cost savings or not, or if we're kind of double paying for some of these advertising and public relations, if maybe that's the need for some of this other public affairs request money. But I would say that with Secretary Lovelace, correct? With his comment that this is to get some more federal money. Is that what you had said? That in order to get some more federal funds, we have to provide some state, I assume, matching funds to acquire some of those. Yes, I would just exercise some caution in doing so, because with all of the executive, I guess, orders or whatever coming from the current presidential administration with the 30/30 land grab and these national heritage areas, I would just be cautious in a state like Kansas of accepting those funds, because with those funds comes more federal regulation. So I just cautious, very cautious about doing that. Thank you.
Comments? Senator Francisco.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Perhaps along with the information about the change in administrative costs, Secretary Lovelace could also just outline those federal dollars. My understanding is that is money that's collected on ammunition and hunting supplies. So it is not just general federal funds. It's not an allocation separate from. And what we've seen is an increase in some of those sales, and that's resulted with increase in funding. But I don't think there are any restrictions tied to those funds.
Thank you very much. Committee, we'll meet tomorrow. We're having the Dean of the College of Agriculture give his report on Wednesday. And then Thursday, we'll take this up at the beginning and get our bill introductions and our bill hearings all on Thursday. So that's the schedule. Look forward to seeing you, unless the weatherman makes it different. So,
Have we heard anything?
supposed to be bad.
Well,
I got to go to a meeting.
We're adjourned.